Great to be back with you, my friends. It's great to be back. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? On a Tuesday, Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandor in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Renee in Indiana, Paul in the Great Northwest, Lucy in Minnesota, John in Maine, Paula is listening, Gail in Kansas City, Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Alan in New York City, Joe in the Inland Empire. Hey everybody, it's so good to be back. We had an amazing experience in Atlanta, a screening of our first film, When Do We Eat, in a retrospective, and then 3 sold out screenings of Guns N' Moses on Sunday. Lots of Q&As, and it was so great to have Nina with me. Usually just they bring in the director, but this time they did the right thing because Nina and I are a mom and pop shop, and they brought us together. And I mean, she's just amazing on stage. The audience really loved her. It's just great to have her take on the movie, and I hope to do many more Q&As with Nina. Now, let's do it. We are pretty far behind. It's certainly not so uncommon. The class that I did my first time through Shas, through the Talmud, through Daf Yomi, was regularly 2 weeks behind. But I do not plan to stay 2 weeks behind. Excuse me. But there's just been so many long pages, just really hard to catch up here in Tractate Sanhedrin. But I was just looking ahead, and there are some shorter pages coming up, particularly in chapter 9, which is ahead. But even here toward the end of chapter 7 and chapter 8. So we'll grab doubles whenever we can, or even just kind of pace ahead a little bit, almost like 1.5 per day, where we can get ourselves caught up. It's gonna happen again. I have a trip coming up. There's gonna be a screening of the movie in Aspen, another one in Boca Raton. So there's other trips coming up. I mean, it's just the nature of releasing a major film, but we'll get caught up. Have no fear. Okay. Our daf today is page 57 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 7. We're picking this up right near the top of page 57a. So, according to the school of Menashe, the prohibition of bloodshed for the descendants of Noah, bloodshed meaning murder, for the descendants of Noah, and here we're talking about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, right? The Noahide commandments. Jews are obligated in 613 commandments. Not every individual in all the commandments. There are some commandments that only apply to Kohanim, to the priests, others that apply only to men and not to women, others that apply to women and not to men, etc. But there are 613 commandments that generally apply to the Jewish people. They don't apply to non-Jews. Non-Jews are not obligated to abstain from eating pork or to abstain from having milk and meat together like Jews are. But even under Torah law, there are 7 commandments that apply to all people, and they're more like categories of commandments. There's a lot that goes into them. We talked about this before. Do not curse God, do not deny God, do not murder, do not steal, do not rape or have other prohibited sexual relationships, establish courts of law, and do not tear a limb from a living animal. Those are the 7 Noahide commandments, and we've been exploring these, and those are the 7 Noahide commandments sort of as the sages finally agreed on them. But there were differing opinions about what the 7 Noahide commandments are. So the school of Menashe had a different list than what has come to be the accepted list. And so we've been comparing a little bit what some sages and minority opinions would hold are the obligations of non-Jews. We'll continue that. So according to the school of Menashe, the prohibition of bloodshed for the descendants of Noah is stated separately in the Torah, as it is written, Genesis 9:6, one who sheds the blood of man, by man his blood shall be shed. Right? The punishment for murder is execution, and this is going to apply not just to Jews but to all people. And the Gemara asks, and how do the other Tanaim, the other sages, interpret this verse, since they're deriving the prohibition for the descendants of Noah, which is to say all people, right? The descendants of Noah are all people, since we're all descended from Noah, since he and his family were the only people that survived the flood. So the ones who derive the laws of the Bnei Noah from different verses than does the school of Menashe, how do they derive, or how do they interpret this verse? If they're not deriving the prohibition of murder for non-Jews from this verse, how are they deriving it, or how are they interpreting this verse? And the Gemara answers, in their opinion, this verse reveals the type of death penalty administered to the descendants of Noah, but it is not the source for the prohibition of bloodshed. So the prohibition of robbery is stated, according to the school of Menashe, as it is written, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you, like the green herbs I have given you all. That's Genesis 9:3. By the way, sometimes you're up at night wondering about things. We've talked very often about the doubling of Hebrew verbs in the Bible for emphasis, right? For instance, you shall execute, you shall surely execute, or you shall surely put him to death. Lamos mois, something like that. This idea of doubling a verb, I'm just not getting other examples coming to mind this moment, but we've had so many of them when we talk about this. And the sages will often make it some kind of an interpretation, since a verb was doubled, not just for emphasis, but it's something that we can learn out from it. And I was curious, where in the Bible is the first use of this kind of doubling for emphasis? And quite interesting, it's as soon as God starts talking to people. When God is creating the world, there are some kinds of doubling, birds that fly, or seeds that sprout, where the word is similar, but it's not this kind of verb that is doubled for emphasis until God says, of all the herbage and the fruit of the trees, you shall surely eat, right? Eat, you shall eat, is how that's put. But of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you may not eat of it, for on the day you eat of it, you shall surely die, right? So in that first commandment, Some would say that the first commandment is peruta, to be fruitful and multiply. But when that is given, it's more that you shall be blessed to be fruitful and multiply. But that first real commandment is don't eat of that tree. And as soon as that, in the wording of that commandment is the first time that we find this doubling verb for emphasis in the Bible. It's pretty interesting. And here we're talking about this precise verse, right? So every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you, like the green herbs I have given you all. I've given you all. And Rabbi Levi says, like the green herbs that sprout all over by themselves and are ownerless, and not like the vegetation of a garden, which belongs to the garden's owner alone. And this indicates that robbery is prohibited, right? That there is such a thing as possession, ownership, and therefore you can't take what belongs to someone else. And that's why all people are prohibited to steal. Now the Gemara asks, and how do the other Tanaim, the majority, the rabbis in the majority, interpret this verse? And the Gemara answers, in their opinion, this verse comes to permit the consumption of meat, which is quite interesting because we have an understanding that in the beginning, the humans were told that they could eat, they were vegetarian, basically, and they could not eat meat until that right was given to Noah and his family after the flood. The prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal is stated in the Torah, as it is written, Genesis 9:4, only flesh with its life, which is its blood, you shall not eat, right? Now, is that the prohibition on eating meat until that privilege was given to Noah and his descendants? Or is this saying something different? Here they're saying, i.e. it is prohibited to eat flesh while the animal that it comes from is still alive. And how do the other Tanaim interpret this verse? In their opinion, that verse comes to permit eating a limb from living, creeping animals, sherets, like insects. This prohibition does not apply to creeping animals. And the distinction that's being made here is that for mammals and for kosher animals, which are mammals, so their blood is associated with, like our blood is associated with our soul, and our blood is distinct from our meat, so to speak, right? So for a cow, for a sheep, for a goat, you can't eat its blood, right? When you slaughter, you have to spill its blood on the ground. For an animal to be, slaughtered in a kosher manner and then eaten in a kosher manner, you have to drain the blood out of it. You certainly cannot drink blood, right? Blood is prohibited because it's associated with the soul. But when it comes to insects, they don't have this distinction. It's as if the blood and the body are the same. And there are kosher insects, like certain kinds of grasshoppers. Now, the prohibition of castration that applies to the descendants of Noah is stated, right? Now, according to the school of Menashe, one of the 7 Noahide commandments is that that like Jews, non-Jews are prohibited to castrate animals. That is a prohibition for Jews. It is not a prohibition for non-Jews, but they have a different list, right? So this is a minority opinion of what are the commandments. And now we're saying, according to that minority opinion, how do they derive their list? So the prohibition of castration that applies to the descendants of Noah is stated as it is written, and you be fruitful and multiply, swarm in the earth and multiply in it. Genesis 9:7, indicating that nothing may be done to prevent reproduction. So the other Tanaim that disagree hold that this verse is written merely as a blessing, not as a mitzvah. The prohibition of kilayim, diverse kinds, right? That we cannot wear shatnez. Jews cannot wear wool and linen. Non-Jews can wear that combination. The school of Menashe holds differently. Where do they derive that? The prohibition of diverse kinds that applies to the descendants of Noah is stated as it is written, of the fowl after their kind, and of the cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. Genesis 6:20, indicating that each species must be kept separate and that crossbreeding is prohibited. This is referring to when the animals came 2 by 2 onto Noah's ark. So the school of Menashe is saying, well, since they came two by two so they could breed with their own species, this implies that we're not allowed to breed them with other species. And according to the other rabbis, that verse does not indicate a commandment. Rather, the reason for keeping the species separate in Noah's ark was merely for the sake of companionship, as animals are most comfortable in the company of other members of their own species. Rav Yosef says, they say in the study hall that a descendant of Noah is executed for transgressing 3 commandments, which are represented by the letters Gimel, Shin, and Resh in a mnemonic device to help us remember it. And what are those 3 prohibitions? Forbidden sexual relations, murder, and for blessing the name of God, which at this point we know means cursing the name of God. It's a euphemism for that. So according to this, of the 7 Noahide commandments, if non-Jews violate 3 of them, I mean, any of these 3, they would be chayav misa, right? They would be subject to the death penalty. Right, chayav means obligated in, misa the death penalty, right? I mean, it would be they would be liable to the death penalty, and so the question is going to be why these 3 and not the other 4? Okay, so Rav Sheshes objects to this statement. Granted, a descendant of Noah is executed for bloodshed, bloodshed meaning murder, as it is written, one who sheds the blood of man, by man his blood shall be shed, in Genesis 9:6. But with regard to those other prohibitions, from where do the sages derive that a descendant of Noah who transgresses them is executed? How do we know that for prohibited sexual relations and for cursing God's name, even a non-Jew would be subject to the death penalty? So if they derive it from the punishment of bloodshed by means of an analogy, meaning that, well, since we know that they're liable to the death penalty for murder, then we can extend that they're going to be liable for violating these other Noahide prohibitions. But if that's the case, then the descendants of Noah should be executed even if they transgressed any of the Noahide commandments. If they are executed because they are included in the term anyone, and similarly the term no one, which is stated with regard to these 2 prohibitions, as it is stated with regard to cursing the name of God, anyone who curses his God shall bear his sin, in Leviticus 24:15. And it is stated with regard to forbidden sexual relations, no one shall approach any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness, Leviticus 18:6. Meaning, if we're saying that anyone who curses God is going to bear his sin, it doesn't say Jews who curse God, it says anyone. So maybe we can extend this to all human beings who curse God would be subject to the death penalty. And likewise, anyone who commits incest. It doesn't say just Jews who commit incest would be liable to the death penalty, it would be anyone. So then, if that's the case, well, then Gentiles should be executed for avodah zarah, for idolatry, right? For bowing down to idols also, as they are included in the term anyone, which is stated in that context. It says, anyone who bows down to an idol will be subject to the death penalty. So why wouldn't we extend that prohibition to non-Jews as well? And we don't. So how do we explain this? So rather, Rav Sheshes says that Rav Yosef's version should be rejected, and that this is what they say in the study hall. A descendant of Noah is executed for transgressing 4 prohibitions, 4 commandments. The 3 that were listed, so again, murder and prohibited sexual relations and cursing God's name, and we add to that, And we add to that idol worship, right? So Rav Yosef would say, they're obligated in idol worship also. In other words, that they're going to be liable to the death penalty if they bow to idols. Yeah, they should be subject to the death penalty. Doesn't mean a Jewish court is going to enforce that penalty, but we should know that that would be the penalty according to Rav Sheshes, saying in the name of Rav Yosef. That they would be executed for those 4. Now the Gemara asks, and is a descendant of Noah executed for idol worship? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa with regard to worshiping idols, matters for which a Jewish court executes the transgressor are prohibited to a descendant of Noah? And the Gemara infers, yes, there is a prohibition for a descendant of Noah, but there is no death penalty. right? We're not saying it's okay for non-Jews to bow and worship statues made by people, idols. It's not okay. It's prohibited. But whereas that's a death penalty offense for a Jew, and you'd have to be warned and witnesses, the whole thing, it's probably never going to happen that the death penalty is actually given for that. But he's liable to the death penalty if all those conditions were met. For a non-Jew, it's a prohibition. Right? Something that if a Jew did it with respect to idolatry, he'd be subject to the death penalty. A non-Jew is prohibited, but we're not going to impose a death penalty on him. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says their prohibition is their death penalty, since the only punishment mentioned in the Torah for transgressing a Noahide mitzvah is execution. So then any descendant of Noah who transgresses is liable to be executed. In other words, we don't have 4 different kinds of death penalty for non-Jews the way we do for Jews. I think we said earlier that it's beheading would be the only death penalty that we use. If there is a death penalty and we don't, impose lashes, a whipping, right, the flogging, which there is for Jews who violate certain prohibitions, but we don't have that for non-Jews. So if something's prohibited, then they are liable to the death penalty, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, and all the other students of Rav say a descendant of Noah is executed for transgressing any of the 7 Noahide commandments. The merciful one revealed this punishment with regard to one mitzvah, the prohibition on murder, and the same is true with regard to all of them. Right? According to this view, a non-Jew who violates any of the Noahide commandments is liable to the death penalty. And the Gemara asks, but is a descendant of Noah executed for robbery? That's one of the 7 Noahide commandments. You can't rob other people. Are we going to say that that's a death penalty offense? But isn't it taught in a baraisa with regard to the following types of robbery? One who steals or robs, right? Steals is when you do it in a hidden way, like a pickpocket, or you take something when no one is looking. And robbery is one who does it openly and brazenly. One who steals or robs, and likewise one who engages in intercourse with a married beautiful woman who is taken as a prisoner of war, and likewise all actions similar to these, if they are done by a Gentile to another Gentile, or by a Gentile to a Jew, the action is prohibited. But if a Jew does so to a Gentile, it is permitted? Is it asking sarcastically? And the Gemara explains the question. And if it is so that a Gentile is liable to be executed for robbery, and it is not merely prohibited to him, then let the Baraisa teach that he is liable to be executed. And the Gemara answers, because the Tana wanted to teach in the latter clause that if a Jew does so to a Gentile, it is permitted, he taught in the former clause that if a Gentile does one of these, it is prohibited. Now, if the Baraisa were to state that if a Gentile does so, he is liable, it would have to state that if a Jew does so to a Gentile, he is exempt, because this is the opposite of liable. That would indicate that it is actually prohibited for a Jew to do so to a Gentile, and that he is merely exempt from liability, which is not the case. Therefore, the word prohibited is used with regard to a Gentile. Therefore, this does not prove that a Gentile is exempt from capital punishment. So the Gemara challenges, but wherever there is liability for capital punishment, this Tana, this rabbi of the Mishna, teaches it as it is taught in the first clause. With regard to bloodshed, again, bloodshed means murder. If a Gentile murders another Gentile, or a Gentile murders a Jew, he is liable. He's subject to the death penalty. If a Jew murders a Gentile, he is exempt. Evidently, the term liable is used in the Baraisa. What does exempt mean in this context? Are Jews allowed to go around killing non-Jews? No, they are not. That is not what it means at all. That is not what it means at all. However, the way that he's going to be tried, the way he's going to be brought to justice is a different path, right? Is a different path. Now the Gemara answers, there in that case, how should the Tana teach it? Should he teach it using the terms prohibited and permitted, indicating that a Jew may kill a Gentile ab initio? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that with regard to a Gentile, and likewise with regard to Jewish shepherds of small livestock who were typically robbers, one may not raise them out of a pit into which they fell, and one may not lower them into a pit. In other words, one may not rescue them from danger, but neither may one kill them ab initio. With regard to robbery, the term permitted is relevant, as it is permitted for a Jew to rob a Gentile? No, it is not. And that's another reason why we also say that Dina de Malchusa Dina, right? The law of the land is the law, right? So Jews don't have, what they don't have, right, is a specific halacha that's stated in the Torah that regulates, crimes between Jews and non-Jews. We have many commandments that regulate, crimes and other relationships, contractual relationships between Jews. Does the Torah speak to this? Is a different question. But it is certainly not permitted for Jews to marry non-Jews, to rob non-Jews. Now the Gemara returns to discuss the details of the prohibition of robbery mentioned in the Baraisa, which included actions similar to it. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to robbery, and really what we're asking here is not what are Jews permitted or prohibited to do. The discussion is actually about what non-Jews are permitted or prohibited to do under the Torah laws that apply to non-Jews. Now, with regard to robbery, to what actions similar to it is the Baraisa referring? And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says it is necessary only to teach the law of a laborer working in a vineyard who eats from the fruit of the vineyard. His action is similar to robbery, and it is prohibited for a Gentile to do so. Right? So even under the Noahide laws, you can't, just because you're at work, right, take stuff from the workplace that doesn't belong to you. The Gemara asks, when does this laborer in a vineyard eat from the fruit? If he does so at the time of the completion of the work, i.e. while he is harvesting the fruit, it is permitted for him to do so, just as a Jew working for another Jew is allowed to eat fruit in that situation. If it is not at the time of the completion of its work, eating the fruit is full-fledged robbery. And there's no novel element in this case. So rather, Rav Papa says that the mention in the Baraisa of actions which are similar to robbery, right? We're trying to figure out what is an action that is similar to robbery and therefore prohibited, but isn't actually robbery, and they're trying to define that. This is necessary only to teach the law of one who robs another of less than the value of one peruta. When you're taking something from somebody else that is worth hardly anything, less than a penny. Is it prohibited or permitted? Is it so de minimis that we don't even care and we say it's not prohibited? Or do we say, well, it might be worth very little, but if you're taking something that's not yours, it's prohibited? Is that just full-fledged robbery? Or is it similar to robbery because the amount is so small? The Gemara asks, if so, why does the Baraisa state that it is prohibited for a Gentile to do so to a Jew? Isn't a Jew apt to forgive such a tiny debt? Why is this considered robbery? And the Gemara answers, although afterward the owner forgives him, does he not incur distress at the time of the robbery? Consequently, at the time of the robber commits a transgression and is liable to be punished for it. And the Gemara challenges this. If the mention of actions similar to robbery is referring to the robbery of less than the value of one peruta, what is the novel element in the case of a Gentile who robs a Gentile? Since they are not apt to grant forgiveness, robbing a Gentile of even a minuscule amount is considered full-fledged robbery and not merely similar to robbery. Rather, Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, says that there is a different explanation. It is necessary only to teach the law of one who withholds the wages of a hired laborer. Somebody's working for you and you don't pay them, that's robbery. Certainly, obviously, right? They worked for you expecting to be paid and then you don't pay them. That's robbery. And it becomes robbery even if you delay the payment unnecessarily. For a Gentile to do so to another Gentile and for a Gentile to do so to a Jew is prohibited. But for a Jew to do so to a Gentile is permitted. Again, what? No, Jews cannot hire Gentiles and exploit them. But the law, which that would hold that is prohibited, is not the same law that we're using here when we're talking about the Noahide laws. This case is less obvious than the other types of robbery, as instead of taking an item from the victim, the robber withholds money that is due to the victim. Now, what is the action that is similar to engaging in intercourse with a beautiful woman who is a prisoner of war, to which the Baraisa was referring? And we're saying that, again, this is not the laws that we follow. This is the way the Noahide commandments are formulated according to the school of Menashe. Okay, so what is it when we're talking about intercourse with a beautiful woman who is a prisoner of war, which the Baraisa is referring? This was a big innovation, right, that the Torah brought to the Jewish people, that, prior to the Torah being given, the standard operating procedure when armies would go to war is, okay, well, you win the battle, and then if there's women there from the nation that you're at war with, the women get exploited and abused. Under Torah law, the Jewish soldiers, if they want that woman, okay, well, you can bring her home back to your place. And then let her mourn for her family for a month, right? And then you can decide if you really want her or not. Like, cooling off period definitely diminished the amount of exploitation of women that was engaged in by armies in the ancient world who were following Torah law. Now, what is similar to this prohibition? Let's see. Where am I? So what is the action that is similar to engaging in intercourse with a beautiful woman who's a prisoner of war, to which our Baraisa is referring? When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Lazar says, that Rabbi Hanina says, in the case of a descendant of Noah, who designated a maidservant as a mate for his slave, and then he himself engaged in intercourse with her, he is executed on her account. Although the maidservant is his property and is not the slave's full-fledged wife, nevertheless, this owner is guilty of adultery, right? He designated one slave to marry another slave, and then he slept with her himself. He just committed adultery and would be subject to the death penalty, according to this view. The Gemara comments, this Baraisa does not teach that a descendant of Noah is liable for actions similar to bloodshed. Abaye says, if you find a Baraisa that teaches this, it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yonasan ben Shaul. As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yonasan ben Shaul says, if a person pursues another to kill him, and the one being pursued can save himself by injuring one of the limbs of the pursuer, but he does not save himself in this manner, and instead kills the pursuer, he is executed for killing him, even though he acted in self-defense. And a descendant of Noah is also killed for this. Right? So Rabbi Yonasan ben Shaul would agree with that view, that if someone's coming to kill you, and you have amazing aim and confidence with a pistol, and you could stop him from killing you by shooting him in the leg, but instead you choose to shoot him in the head and he dies, then you would be liable for murder. That is a minority view. That is not halacha. The halacha, according to the majority, is if someone's coming to kill you, yeah, like in that situation, no one is expecting you to be able to aim perfectly and maim him rather than kill him. If you kill someone who's coming to kill you, you did the right thing and you saved your life, and you would not be guilty of murder or liable to a death penalty for that. Now we're on page 57b. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha found that it was written in a book of Agadot in the study hall of Rav. Right? Agadot are the more story and lyrical and wisdom teachings of the Talmud, as opposed to laws, straight up laws. So contrary to the law, with regard to a Jew, a descendant of Noah is executed on the basis of the verdict of even one judge, and by the testimony of even one witness, and without being given forewarning before committing the transgression. Okay, so here we see not equal before the law in terms of Jews being brought before a rabbinic court and non-Jews being brought before a rabbinic court. And this is why non-Jews have their own courts. There's no reason why a non-Jew would come before a rabbinic court. And if he did, he would not have the same protections that a Jew does. Jewish courts are made for Jews. That's their purpose. Now, contrary to the laws with regard to, I just read that. Now, he can be judged or testified against only by the mouth of a man and not by the mouth of a woman. And that's a protection, right? Jews also, the witnesses have to be men, not women. But even a relative may judge his case or testify against him, which for Jews, the judge can't be your relative and he can't be a relative of one of the litigants. And neither can the witnesses. And the sages said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael that a descendant of Noah is executed even for killing fetuses. Right? So that's interesting. A Jew is going to be guilty of murder if he kills a person that has already been born. And while abortion is mostly illegal, there are certain situations where an abortion might be legal under halacha, under Jewish law. It is, in some cases, obviously it depends on timing. There's a lot of nuance to this, and we're not going to get into a discussion of abortion under Jewish law. But generally speaking, there are kinds of abortion that are permitted under Jewish law. But according to this, if a non-Jew commits an abortion and kills a fetus, he would be guilty of murder. He's held to a different standard than Jews are. And the Gemara asks, well, where are these matters derived? And Rabbi Yehuda says, they are derived from that which the verse states, quote, and your blood of your lives I will require. At the hand of every animal I will require it, and at the hand of man, even at the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. That's Genesis 9:5. These are the laws given after Noah and his family came off the ark. Now it is derived from the term I will require, God speaking, which is stated in the singular that a descendant of Noah is executed on the basis of the verdict of even one judge. It is derived from the phrase at the hand of every animal that one is executed even without forewarning, as an animal certainly cannot forewarn someone. It is derived from the phrase I will require it, and at the hand of man, with I stated in the singular, that the sentence is issued on the basis of the testimony of even one witness. And it is derived from the phrase at the hand of every man, that the judgment and testimony must be at the hand of a man, but not at the hand of a woman. It is derived from the term his brother, that the testimony of the witness is accepted even if he is a relative of the defendant. Now it is stated in the book of Agadot that the sages said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, a descendant of Noah is executed even for killing fetuses. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from that which is written. Quote, one who sheds the blood of a person by a person shall his blood be shed. Right? One who sheds the blood of a person by a person shall his blood be shed. Meaning, right, one who murders shall be executed. Another person will come and execute him. But that's how we're translating ba'adam, by a person, right? One who murders a person, one who sheds the blood of a person, by a person will his blood be shed. But ba'adam could also be translated as in a person. And that's where they're going to get, who is a person that's inside another person? That would be a fetus. Right? The word ba'adam literally means in a person and is interpreted homiletically. What is a person that is in a person, inside a person? You must say this is a fetus that is in its mother's womb. So accordingly, a descendant of Noah is liable for killing a fetus. And the Gemara comments, right? And where did the law end up on this? This is where the law ended up. A descendant of Noah who killed a fetus while it was in its mother's womb is liable to be executed, although a Jew is not liable to be executed for such an action. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael and in opposition to the opinion of the Tana of the school of Menashe. The Gemara comments, and the first Tana who does not derive the law concerning fetuses is the Tana of the school of Menashe, who says that all death penalties stated with regard to the descendants of Noah are referring to nothing other than strangulation. Right? Talking about which death penalty do we apply if the death penalty is to be meted out. And he interprets this verse as follows: cast, i.e. redirect, this term in a person and explain it with regard to the latter part of the verse and interpret it homiletically like this: in a person his blood shall be shed. In what manner is a person's blood shed while it is inside a person's body, meaning without external bleeding? You must say that this is strangulation. It is therefore derived that the execution of a descendant of Noah, if he is to be executed, is by strangulation. Rav Hamnuna raises an objection to the statement in the book of Agadot that a descendant of Noah can be judged or testified against only by a man and not by a woman. And is a woman who is a descendant of Noah not commanded to establish courts of judgment? All non-Jews are obligated to have courts of judgment. But isn't it written with regard to Abraham, who at that point had the status of a descendant of Noah before he was called a Jew? For I have known him, right? Before, in other words, before God entered into a covenant with Abraham, then he was a descendant of Noah like any other human being. For I have known him to the end that he may command his sons and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice. Genesis 18:19. So the word household is referring to the women, indicating that they are also commanded to execute justice. So he raises the objection and then he resolves it. Abraham commanded his sons to carry out justice, whereas his household, this is a reference to the women in his family, he commanded them to give charity. The Hebrew word for righteousness, tzedek, can also mean charity, tzedakah. Now, Rav Avia, the elder, said to Rav Papa, why not say that a female descendant of Noah who killed someone should not be executed, as it is written at the hand of every man and not at the hand of every woman? Rav Papa said to him, this is what Rav Yehuda says. It is derived from the phrase, one who sheds the blood of a person, that one who murders is liable to be executed in any case, whether that person is male or female. Rav Avia asked further, why not say that a female descendant of Noah who committed adultery should not be executed? As it is written, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. A man, but not a woman. Genesis 2:24. Rav Papa said to him, this is what Rav Yehuda says. At the end of the verse it states, and they shall be one flesh. And the verse then combines men and women, indicating that the same law applies to both. Adulterers are subject to the death penalty, both the man and the woman. The sages taught in a baraisa with regard to the verse, no one. Right? This is how we're going to translate ish, right? Literally man. But in this case, it's saying ish, nobody, right? In the context, no one, ish, shall approach any that is kin to him to uncover their nakedness, right? This is the blanket prohibition on incest. Now, the verse could have stated, ish shall not approach, a man shall not approach, or a person shall not approach. Why does it say ish? Why is it doubled? And so we're saying no one, right? No person, right? It could have said, a person shall not approach, his next of kin and commit incest. Why does that have to say, no person shall approach? We would have got the same meaning if it just said, a person shall not approach. It's almost like a double negative, isn't it? Why are we doing it this way? The verse could have stated, one shall not approach. Why must the verse state no one? Well, this is to include Gentiles who are prohibited from engaging in forbidden sexual relations, just as Jews are prohibited. So the Gemara asks, but is it derived from here? It is derived from there, from the verse that was already interpreted as teaching this law. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, in Genesis 2:16. And this alludes to forbidden sexual relations and that all people are prohibited in it, not just Jews. And the Gemara answers there, the verse is referring to their women, meaning Gentile women with whom relations are forbidden. And here it is referring to our women, Jewish women, with whom relations are forbidden. In other words, a Gentile who engages in intercourse with a married Jewish woman is liable. As it is taught in the latter clause of the Baraisa, if a Gentile engages in intercourse with those Jewish women with whom relations are forbidden, meaning married Jewish women, so then he is judged according to the laws of the Jews, right? So what we're saying here is, if anybody who sleeps with a married woman is violating a prohibition. But a Gentile who sleeps with a married Jewish woman, we're gonna use a different law to get him to the death penalty than if he slept with a married Gentile woman. Now the Gemara answer. Okay, so the Gemara asks, with regard to what law is this Gentile judged according to the laws of the Jews? Why would we judge a Gentile according to the laws of the Jews? He's not obligated in the laws of the Jews. Rav Nachman says that Rabba Bar Avu says the statement of the Baraisa is necessary only to teach these laws, that he must be judged by a Sanhedrin, and that he is punished only if 2 witnesses testify concerning him, and only if he was issued a forewarning before his transgression. That kind of civil procedure for coming to the death penalty from adultery will apply to the Gentile, even though he's not bound by Jewish laws, he's bound by laws that apply to all Noahides, all people, all humans. The Gemara asks, should the law of a Gentile who engaged in intercourse with a forbidden Jewish woman, right? So a Gentile who slept with a married Jewish woman, should the law of a Gentile who engaged in intercourse with a married Jewish woman be less stringent than that of a Gentile who engaged in intercourse with a forbidden Gentile woman, right? A married Gentile woman, in which case these conditions do not apply? Rather, Rabbi Yochanan says, the statement of the Baraisa is necessary only to teach the law in the case of a Gentile who engages in intercourse with a betrothed young Jewish woman. Betrothed means it's like engagement, and we talk about this a lot, but it's not an engagement, because to break off a betrothal, you would need a bill of divorce, a get. So it's like marriage, but it's unlike marriage in that the man and woman have not consummated the union yet, right? They have not moved from betrothal to full marriage. Okay, so what's going on here? So a Gentile who engages in intercourse with a betrothed young Jewish woman, which does not apply, this statement of the Baraisa is necessary only to teach the law in the case of a Gentile who engages in intercourse with a betrothed young Jewish woman, which does not apply to Gentiles. By law, only marriage applies to Gentiles, not betrothal, right? So interesting. This two-stage betrothal and then full marriage is only under Jewish law. Gentiles obviously have engagement, that they can get engaged, but if you break off an engagement, you don't need a divorce, right? So the idea of betrothal, that if you break it off requires divorce, that only applies to Jews. It doesn't apply to Gentiles. Therefore, we judge them according to our law in that case, right? So a Jewish man who sleeps with a betrothed Jewish woman, he would be liable to the death penalty for adultery, and so would a Gentile, and we would have to try him under Jewish law because in their system, they don't have this prohibition. Now the Gemara asks, and with regard to Gentiles who engage in intercourse with a married Jewish woman, do we judge them according to their law or ours? But isn't it taught in the Baraisa, if a Gentile engages in intercourse with a betrothed young Jewish woman, he is punished by stoning. If he engages in intercourse with a married Jewish woman, he is punished by strangulation. And the Gemara explains its question. And if they are judged according to their law, he would be executed by the sword, which is the only kind of death penalty that applies to non-Jews. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, what is the meaning of the phrase, a married woman, which the Tana teaches? It is referring to a case where the woman had entered the wedding canopy, but had not yet engaged in intercourse with her husband, in which case she is considered married according to the laws that apply to Jews, but not according to the laws that apply to Gentiles. Very interesting in between state, right? That she was under the chuppah, so she had the full wedding ceremony, but they haven't consummated it yet, right? So according to Jewish law, they're fully married, and according to the laws that apply to the Gentiles, at least at this period in history, that would not be considered a full marriage according to non-Jewish law. Since with regard to the Gentiles, marriage has not yet taken effect, we judge them according to our laws, Jewish law. Therefore, a Gentile who engages in intercourse with such a woman who stood under the chuppah with her husband but has not yet consummated the union, this Gentile who, raped her, seduced her, he would be executed by strangulation, not decapitation by the sword. As Rabbi Hanina teaches, Gentiles can have the status of a married woman who has engaged in intercourse with her husband, i.e. such a woman is considered married according to their laws, but they cannot have the status of a married woman who has entered the wedding canopy but has not engaged in intercourse with her husband. It is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Any forbidden sexual relations for which a Jewish court administers capital punishment are prohibited to a descendant of Noah, and any forbidden sexual relations for which a Jewish court does not administer capital punishment are not prohibited to the descendants of Noah. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, right? So in other words, if something for which a Jewish man and a Jewish woman who had sex, if their prohibition led to the death penalty, like if they committed adultery, that such an action would be prohibited for Gentiles, but would not result in a death penalty. If something led to charis, right, which is certain kinds of, like incest is not actually a death penalty offense at the hands of an earthly court, of a rabbinic court. It's charis, right? It would be death at the hands of the heavenly court, which means that they would be. We don't know exactly what it means. The sages argue on that. Does it mean that somebody's life is shortened, that they'll die childless, that their children will die before them? There's a lot of possible meanings of what death at the hands of the heavenly court means. But for a crime, for a transgression, that the punishment under Jewish law for Jews is charis, for non-Jews, right? They're not even prohibited in that. They might be prohibited according to their laws, but our law doesn't prohibit them in those actions. Where am I? Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis, right, who overrule Rabbi Meir, say there are many types of forbidden sexual relations for which a Jewish court does not administer capital punishment, and they are nevertheless prohibited to a descendant of Noah. Just because it's only prohibited by charis to us doesn't mean it's going to be permitted to them. No, there's many types of things that result in charis for us and are prohibited for non-Jews, for the descendants of Noah. So if a Gentile engages in intercourse with those Jews with whom relations are forbidden, he is judged according to the laws of the Jews. Right? So if he commits adultery with a married Jewish woman, then he is going to be tried under Jewish law. If he engages in intercourse with those descendants of Noah with whom relations are forbidden, he is judged according to the halachas of the descendants of Noah. In other words, if a non-Jew, Jewish man sleeps with a non-Jewish woman and she's married to some other non-Jewish man, so they committed adultery, but they're not going to be judged for that in a rabbinic court. They have their own courts for that. It's prohibited according to our law, but that's not going to be judged in our courts. Now, and we have only the case of a betrothed young woman as a case where a Gentile is judged according to the laws of the Jews in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, right? Because this betrothed young woman, that condition of betrothal only exists under Jewish law, right? Under their laws, he hasn't violated the law. They don't have a law for that because they don't have betrothal the way we do. They might have engagement. They don't have betrothal according to our laws. So if somebody, a non-Jew slept with this betrothed young woman, if he was going to be tried for that, it would have to be in a Jewish court. Now the Gemara suggests, and let the Tana also count the case of a woman who entered the wedding canopy but had not yet engaged in intercourse with her husband. And the Gemara explains this Tana is the Tana of the school of Menashe, minority view, who says that all death penalties stated with regard to the descendants of Noah are referring to nothing other than strangulation. And since the punishment in Jewish law for engaging in intercourse with a married woman is also strangulation, so both this punishment and that punishment are strangulation, and there is no difference between the law of the Jews and the laws of the Gentiles in such a case, according to the school of Menashe. Now, with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, stated in the first clause of the Baraisa, the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Meir hold that any forbidden sexual relations for which a Jewish court administers capital punishment is prohibited to a descendant of Noah? But isn't it taught in a baraisa with regard to a convert who was not conceived in sanctity, as his parents were still Gentiles, but his birth was in sanctity? We're at the top of 58a. So this would be referring to a non-Jewish woman that while she was pregnant, she converted to Judaism. So the baby was conceived, in a Gentile woman, but it emerged from the birth canal, right? She gave birth and she was Jewish. So is this baby Jewish? Was not conceived in sanctity, as his parents were still Gentiles, but his birth was in sanctity, as his mother converted before his birth. So he has maternal kinship, i.e., his relationship to his mother's relatives is recognized, but he does not have paternal kinship. How so? If he married his maternal half-sister who was born before him and converted, he must divorce her. Although by Torah law they are considered unrelated, as a convert is considered to be reborn, and all his previous family relationships are disregarded according to halacha. Very strange law, right? But according to halacha, if somebody who converts to Judaism, right, he's now a child of Abraham and Sarah. He can still have a wonderful, loving relationship with his birth parents, but according to Jewish law, he's not related to them. Right? And so therefore, if a brother and sister, who were not Jewish, and they, converted, right? And they became Jews, then technically they could marry each other because they're not related to the people who were their relatives before they converted, right? They don't have relatives under the law. We would, probably under rabbinic law, this is prohibited, but under Torah law, technically they could marry each other. We wouldn't let them do it, but that's just a kind of natural extension of this concept that they're no longer related to their birth relatives because they've been essentially reborn as Jews. Kind of interesting, that is a law, and that's an interesting terminology for it. So how so? If he married his maternal half-sister who was born before him and converted, he must divorce her. Well, because she converted, right? The mother converted before he was born. So now those are his relatives and he can't marry them. Although by Torah law, they're considered unrelated, as a convert is considered to be reborn and all his previous family relationships are disregarded according to law, according to halacha, the sages prohibited their marriage, lest he think that as a Jew it is permitted for him to engage in behaviors that were previously forbidden to him. You see, by Torah law, it would technically be permitted, but by rabbinic law, prohibited. If she is his paternal half-sister, he may maintain her as his wife, as it is permitted for a Gentile to marry his paternal half-sister. If he married his father's maternal half-sister, he must divorce her. If he married his father's paternal half-sister, he may maintain her as his wife. If she is his mother's maternal half-sister, he must divorce her. If she is his mother's paternal half-sister, Rabbi Meir says he must divorce her, and the rabbis say he may maintain her as his wife. As Rabbi Meir would say, with regard to any forbidden relative who is forbidden due to maternal kinship, whether the woman is his paternal relative, for example, his father's maternal half-sister, or his maternal relative, he must divorce her, whereas if she is forbidden due to paternal kinship, he may maintain her as his wife. This is in that case, right, where his mother converted before he was born, but has these other relatives. And according to all opinions, he is permitted to marry his brother's wife and his father's brother's wife and all other relatives with whom relations are forbidden. In the case of a born Jew, they would be permitted to him because they're no longer his relatives. The expression and all other relatives with whom relations are forbidden, this is added to include his father's wife, who is permitted to him if she was widowed or divorced from his father, his birth father. With regard to a Gentile who married a woman and her daughter and they all converted, he may remain married to one, but he must divorce the other. And he should not marry the second of them, even in ab initio. If his wife, meaning the daughter, died, he is permitted to maintain his mother-in-law as his wife, and some say that he is prohibited from maintaining his mother-in-law. In any event, Rabbi Meir clearly holds that several forbidden relationships for which a Jew is not liable to receive capital punishment, but only charis, are nevertheless forbidden to descendants of Noah as well, namely intercourse with one's sister or one's parent's sister. That's the point of this. Earlier they said that something that's prohibited to Jews by charis would actually be permitted for non-Jews, under the Noahide laws. And here they're saying no, at least according to Rabbi Meir, things that are prohibited by Kares are also prohibited to Noahides, to non-Jews. Rav Yehuda says, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rabbi Yehuda says, this is not difficult. This Baraisa cites the statement of Rabbi Meir according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And that previously mentioned Baraisa cites the statement of Rabbi Meir according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. As it is taught in the Baraisa with regard to the verse, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh, Genesis 2:24, that Rabbi Eliezer says his father is referring to his father's sister, i.e. one must abandon the possibility of marrying his father's sister and marry someone else. His mother is referring to his mother's sister. And Rabbi Akiva says his father, this is referring to his father's wife, and his mother, this is referring to his mother literally. And shall cleave to his wife, but not to a male. Such a relationship is not defined as cleaving to his wife, but not to the wife of another man. And they shall be one flesh. This indicates that he should marry one of those with whom he can become one flesh, i.e. that they can bear children together. And this excludes domesticated and undomesticated animals with which one is prohibited from engaging in bestiality, as they do not become one flesh. All of these are also forbidden to the descendants of Noah, just as they are forbidden to Jews. That's where we will knock off. Continue tomorrow. Sharon, at the time when the temple is rebuilt, what will be the status of the Noahide commandments? My understanding is the same as now. They will be valid, right? The Noahides will be, all people will be obligated in the Noahide commandments. What will happen when the temple is rebuilt, meaning when Mashiach comes, is what I've heard is that then it will be too late for non-Jews to convert to Judaism. Right? So anybody who's thinking of converting to Judaism, so you should make sure it's a kosher conversion, and you study with a rabbi that can give you a kosher conversion. And just in case Mashiach comes, very soon, if you're thinking about converting to Judaism, get going, because once the Messiah comes, then it will be too late to convert to Judaism. And at that time, but there will still be commandments that apply to all people, the Noahide commandments. So as far as I know, that they will still be in force. Bill, a further note on the Noahide laws that we've made before, but it's been a few tractates since it came up. The rule to establish courts also means to establish laws or social rules. And the reason that becomes important for those of us who are Gentiles is this: the commandment to worship God within the Noahide laws in turn interacts with the commandment to create rules, so that those of us who are part of monotheistic religions like Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Druze, Zoroastrians, etc., that have customs, laws, rules, God very much expects us, right, meaning Bill and people who are in these groups, expects us to follow those and will hold us accountable as if he gave them to us himself, presuming they are not contrary to his will naturally. That is a really interesting statement. Thank you, Bill. Sharon, in the Ten Commandments, the prohibition of stealing is often understood by many rabbis to actually mean kidnapping. Just so, because stealing is prohibited elsewhere, just taking property. And when you're talking about stealing that would result in the death penalty, then you're talking about kidnapping, and that is the kind of stealing. And I don't remember off the top of my head exactly how this is derived, but definitely, according to traditional Jewish law, the kidnapping that's in the Ten Commandments is understood to be, the robbery that's in the Ten Commandments is understood to be robbing people, which is kidnapping. Joseph, many non-Jewish conspiracy theorists will point to these pages and say that Jews are trying to rule over the world and will enforce Torah law with execution, given the ability to expand the land of Israel. Do the sages come to any laws which might suggest this is even if it is misunderstood? No, right? No. Like it's exactly right that people will take some laws that are here out of context and say, well, this law doesn't apply, when a Jew does it to a Gentile, or that Gentiles will be subject to a death penalty under such and such a law, and therefore this shows that Jews, what they really want to do is take over the world and execute everybody else. It's nonsense, right? Because as we've seen, for a Jewish court to impose a death penalty is so difficult, it almost never happens. And that generally what they're saying here is that non-Jews have their own courts. They have to have courts, and that's where they're going to have their crimes tried, is in their own courts. And the only times when non-Jews are actually going to be brought for a death penalty case is, when they seduce a married Jewish woman, and some would say only when they seduce or rape a betrothed Jewish woman. But all the other cases, they go to their own court system for that. Ifa, conversion takes a full year. If a baby was born from a Jewish woman who conceived him before the full conversion, she was in the process of converting during his conception, does this intention matter? It's very interesting. Conversion, I've certainly heard that it takes a full year. I don't know if it literally has to take a year, but that would also be a little bit more modern. It's interesting. Conversion used to be a little bit easier to accomplish, right? It was a little bit easier to accomplish. Like a woman would be supervised by a rabbi, and or a man would be supervised by a rabbi. They would convert. They would have to know the laws. But it's become more formalized in modern times. And don't shoot me. I'm just the messenger. But the idea of other denominations of Judaism, specifically referring to Reform and Conservative, that's so recent in Jewish history, right? Reform Judaism began about 200 years ago. Conservative was more recent than that. And there was never such a thing as Orthodox Judaism. That word was only invented to distinguish between these other kinds of Judaism. Now, according to traditional Torah law, there's a real problem with Reform and Conservative Judaism, because they come and say that things are permitted, which, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, as our sages have interpreted, as the halacha has been laid out, they permit things that are prohibited, right? I mean, a Jew cannot do things that Reform and Conservative Judaism say you can do. So where that matters is in conversion, right? Because if you convert, according to a Beis Din that's not a, for lack of a better word, Orthodox Beis Din, a rabbinic court, and what we would call a kosher conversion, then that conversion is not going to be universally accepted in the Jewish world. And people would say, it's nice, you've taken a step, you're certainly showing your intention to join the Jewish people, but unless you're planning to live, as a Shomer Shabbos Jew, who's keeping Shabbos, who's keeping kosher, who if they're married, they're keeping, the family purity laws, etc., then you haven't really finished that conversion process. And that's much more necessary in modern times, where we have, these divisions and distinctions among the Jewish people. But that didn't exist in ancient times. Now, there were always people who were sort of going off the derrick, Jews who were just leaving Judaism behind. That's not, sadly, a new phenomenon. It's in the Bible. We saw people, terrible, right? Wandering off and chasing after idols, starting with the Jewish kings who did a terrible thing. And that's why ultimately we lost the first temple and again lost the second temple. But changing Judaism and calling it Judaism was not quite something that they did back then. It was a little bit different. These are very sensitive areas. I certainly don't mean to offend anybody. I'm just the messenger, right? I'm just telling you what, with the Gedolim, right? The great rabbis of this generation and all the previous generations would say about these kinds of issues. And lastly, Bill, I think we've covered this before. The rabbis rule that a Gentile who converts to Judaism, but who came from a Gentile culture that had stricter rules on sexual relations than Judaism, had to keep the stricter set of rules so that there may not be the appearance of descending in sanctity. It was, I want to say, in Yevamos. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of nuance to that. I think you're basically remembering the basics, but it wasn't stated as a generality like this. This was kind of like how we can understand it, but it was in a very specific case that we would have to be more careful, about that. And for that reason, that they wouldn't somehow become Jewish and in some aspect of his life and practice descend in the level of sanctity. And I can't remember what the example was. This actually is a good reminder of how, and we see the sages, that when they have a law that they're not quite sure how to interpret it or understand it, they say, well, what is the case? What is the case? Now, it might be a hypothetical case. It might be a case that doesn't really happen in the real world, but they're like, what would be the case where such a law and such a principle would apply? Let's not speak about it in a generality. Let's try to understand what was the case, right? And I can't remember the case that you're referring to offhand. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. Tomorrow, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great